Making Connections, Module 2, page 96. Part of being a strong reader is making connections while you read. The more connections you make, the better you will understand the author's perspective, experience, and/or their ideas. There are three types of connections that can be made for everything you read: text to self, text to text, and text to world. The more connections you make, the more meaningful the reading will be, and the better your comprehension will be. Let's look at this example and make some connections. The federal government plans to regulate e-cigarettes to make vaping products less accessible to young people. The aim is to protect young people and non-users from nicotine addiction while allowing adults to access e-cigarettes. We know that there is some evidence to suggest that the use of vaping products can be used as a harm reduction tool for people who are current smokers, Health Minister Jane Philpott told reporters in the Commons. But at the same time, they have been shown to be an enticement for young people to take up smoking and become addicted to nicotine. The government aims to regulate the manufacture, sale, labeling, and promotion of e-cigarettes and vaping products. Brand colors, logos, and graphics on tobacco packages would be restricted. First, let's make a text-to-self connection. This type of connection is relating the author's writing directly to your own life or to that of someone you personally know. To make one of these, we can say, well, this reminds me of, and think of, what does this remind you about your life or someone you know? This article reminds me of when my friend quit smoking using an e-cigarette. As the article notes, electronic cigarettes or vaporizers, there's a possibility that they could help people stop smoking traditional cigarettes and tobacco. While I don't know if it really worked or if it was the best choice or if it was healthy, that's a connection I have to this text. While I was reading it, it reminded me of when my friend quit smoking using an e-cigarette. Next, we can make a text-to-text connection. This is when you relate the piece to something you've read somewhere else, likely at another time. It could be a book, a newspaper article, a story, a poem, anything else you've read. The idea is to connect something in this text to something you've read at some other time. Again, in this example, it reminds me of the article about the Canadian government banning trans fats. If you remember back to one of our previous videos, we read an article about how the Canadian government was banning trans fats. This reminds me of that article because in both articles, the government is regulating a substance to try to protect Canadians' health. In one case, the government has decided to ban trans fats. In this case, the government is considering controlling or regulating vaporizers and e-cigarettes. In both texts, there's a similarity, and this text reminded me. I've made a connection between the two texts. Finally, you can make a connection from the text to the world. This is when you relate the piece to something outside of your own life. It could be real-life events, news stories, movies, interviews, almost anything. The idea is to connect what you're reading in the text to the world at large, not just something in your life or something else you've read. In this case, this example reminds me of how many vape or e-cigarette stores are opening in Alberta. I've noticed that in Alberta in the last few years, there have been vaporizer and e-cigarette stores popping up everywhere. Reading this text reminded me of all of these stores I'm seeing popping up where I live and in other parts of Alberta. This is a connection between the text and the real world. Remember, the more connections you can make while you read, the better you'll understand the text. Connections can be text to self, text to text, and text to the real world.